everyone, it's Lolita, and this is the demo video for mixing tones. I hope you enjoy and learn something. So we're all set up to continue color mixing exercises because what I did here is I left my palette from before. I did not clean this out, and that is one of the beauties of working with watercolors is you can always leave your palette overnight or however long of a period that you actually would like to leave it, and it is going to allow you to reactivate it. That's the nature of watercolor. So all of these, I'm just going to reactivate them just a little, put a little bit of water in there for when I'm ready to get in there and start using these colors. And then I've got grays mixed back here. So today we're going to paint some tones, and tones are the color plus gray. So I've already pre-mixed some grays over here. I've got three different tones of grays mixed. And this one's already started to break apart, but I will go back in and reactivate that also when I'm ready to use it. So I'm going to mix three different tones of red. And what I'm going to do is, like I mentioned, I'm going to go back in and reactivate these, mix them up so that they have nice solid tones. And so I'm going to start with, I've decided to start with my darkest gray since that's the one I went in and mixed up. And I'm going to take this red that we've been working with and mix some gray into it. And I'm going to get the darkest tone from amongst the grays that I've got here. So I'm adding quite a bit of gray to it. I had that water there to activate the red. I'm going to move this over to a different section of the palette. Let's see if I elevate that just a little so that it flows this direction. And so now I've got a tone of red mixed up, and that's going to be with my darkest tone, and I'm just going to stay with that direction with all of my different colors that we're creating tones of. So this is one tone of red where I've mixed a dark gray into it. So I think I would like to have used a little more pigment instead of having it so washed out. So I'm going to go back into this gray and add a little more gray here. I'm going to just tilt this direction and just to get more pigment going. I think I need to get more red actual pigment. So I'm going to just go back into my red and with my brush wet and work that surface and pull that pigment over to this area. So I have more of a saturated pigment, and I'm going to go over this rectangle a second time even when it's wet, and that's going to be okay. That's going to give me a more saturated pigment. So I'm going back in with more pigment. I'm going to dry my brush out a little and go back in with a little more pigment over that area. So that way I get a more saturated tone here. I wasn't particularly satisfied with that tint of a tone that I put down previously. It just was too unsatisfying in terms of how dark the paint is that I'm working with, and I knew that I didn't have enough pigment in it, so I'm going over that again. That's also why it's a good idea to go in and do test strips and use before you go in and commit yourself to putting your paint down, know what you're actually working with. So I'm getting more pigment out, and I'm going to put that pigment over here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up just a little bit because I don't want this gray or this tone interfering too much with my new tone that I'm going to mix. So I'm actually going to clean my palette up and remove that paint because I don't want to use it again, and I don't have enough space to continue working in that well in order to mix my next tone of gray. So that feels like I've got a decent amount of pigment there. Oops, look what I've done. Okay, folks, so don't be like Lolita. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this entire area and leave it where it's tinted just a, and then I'm going to go over it again. So I'm lifting all of that, all of the pigment I had put down before, and I'm going to go over it again with and do that mixture all over again and clean that up. So let's go back in with the dark gray and mix that into this nice pure red pigment that I put here. And I'm going to go back over and do my dark tone again. And I picked up most of what was there previously, and it leaves the surface damp, so that's sort of a nice surface to do a little wet into wet like painting. And keeping that idea of the live edge going. Probably could bring this closer to my hand so I don't have to stretch so much. Let me move these around so that I can bring it closer to myself and maybe reposition myself even too so I have a better access. All right, that makes a lot more sense. I am painting in where it's a lot more natural position now, where I'm stationed a little bit more in natural position relative to where my paper is. So I'm going to take this up again and get some more red out, put this off over to the side, and bring this closer so I can access that red, and just put some more water in there, reactivate that red, and then I'm going to mix it in with the second tone of gray. So I've got that lighter tone of gray there, and just bringing all of that over. I've got some excess in that corner. All right, cleaning my brush up, taking all of this red paint off so this way I'm not going to contaminate my gray. Let me move my brushes out of the way so I can use this area just a little more for the purposes that I have it here for, and that's cleaning. All right, that looks like it's flowing clear enough, and I am just going to go in here, reactivate this just a little, move this down here, and add some gray, that second gray into my gray and red tone mixture of my tone number 2. I'm just going to put that down in the second box I have designated for my tones, and this is the gray number 2. And then I'm going to do that same thing again where I put in the gray number 3, the lightest gray, and see what tone I make of from red and gray number 1, or the lightest gray, whichever, doesn't matter how you number them. So I'm just cleaning that up, and I'm going to go back in here, and I see some of that sitting on the surface, so I just want to move that around just a little more. Then to try to even up that surface just a little. This is one of the issues you're going to confront when you are painting flat, is sometimes you don't always get the physical tilt that you need. I'm going to go over that entire, just do another passage over this and try to get it a little more water to pigment ratio, and hope I can move the pigment around. So that looks very close to the number 1, or rather the darkest pigment. I'm going to go in and just pick up a couple of these areas where some of this pigment has settled because the surface of our paper isn't exactly even. Pick some of that up and just move this around just a little more. Looks like I'm picking more of the pigment up than I'm interested in picking up. So I'm just going to move that around again, just trying to get a slightly more even surface. And moving it down again, moving it around. All right, that's much more even. Now I'm going to go in with my last and final pigment of red and gray, the lighter one. And I feel I have adequate room over in this corner of the well of my palette here that I can mix that last tone, the lightest tone, independent of the middle tone, without getting the two different tones mixed up. So I'm mixing in this lightest tone now into that red, and I'm gonna mix that in really nice, get that nice even tone throughout. Take that red, mix it in, and now I'm just going to take this, and that's going to be what I put in my final little box that I have designated for my tones of red. All right, and just moving that around, picking up more paint so I can have enough to go through the area that I designated, this nice little rectangle here. Okay, and that is our first tone, and we have done 3 different tones of red. And now let's see what happens if we mix 3 different tones of yellow. Moving my brushes over off to the side so I can clean, have more surface for cleaning. All right, so I am going to try to make this yellow portion over here a little more accessible to the area I'm working in, and move this around. And I'm going to just go back into this yellow, and I think what I'm going to do is spread this all around here and move all of this solid yellow up physically to this end of my well and give it a nice little test. Okay, that looks like the yellow we're working with. Clean that up, take some of that excess paint and water, moisture out of my brush, because we want to make sure that we moderate that. going back in, and okay, so that is nice and clean. So I'm going to go into my darkest gray tone down here, and I'm going to put some of that gray and mix it into this yellow down here on this end of my well, and get a nice even color. It almost looks like it's producing something of this grayish green, and I feel fairly comfortable with that as my first tone. So that's going to be my darkest tone of yellow, and mixing it with that particular mixture of black and gray, you see I get another olive green out of it, you know, which lets me know that particular black has quite a bit of a blue undertone to it. And I just dabbed off some of that excess paint in my brush, so that way I could just have an adequate amount to fill the area of the rectangle. All right, now I'm going to wash that off, and I'm going to go for the second gray, and I'm going to put it in this area because I did allow myself enough room to access that, and I will go over and dip into my second value of gray, which is just slightly in the middle of the two grays that I've created here. And I'm just going to put that in this area here, so this way I have it isolated off all to itself. And mix that in with some yellow, that second gray. Wash my brush out and just get a little moisture back in to get a little bit more movement out of that particular little puddle. I think I want to put just a little bit more gray in to it and drag a little bit more of that yellow pigment. Mix that around just a little more. Okay, and then that's my second tone of yellow. And I'm still getting a very olive color of green. And it's just slightly lighter than the mixture, the tone that we mixed before. Pulling that down so it doesn't puddle up too much. Trying to get an even tone throughout here without actually working on an angle, working on a flat surface. All right, that's our second tone, and then let's make our third tone, and that will be, again, using this lighter gray. And I'm going to just put that over in this area with this lighter gray. And now I've got my tone number 3 of yellow, where I've mixed in 3 different grays. Get more paint on my brush. And this is still that falls into that yellow, or rather the almost an olive family, but this might start heading more towards a color that was popular in the 60s called chartreuse. So this is just this nice light olive type of green, where it's got a lot of yellow undertones to it. So now let's see what happens when we add that to the blue, and I'm going to do the same thing with the blue over here, where I'm going to have it spread out across my well, so this way I can mix up 3 different blues just using that same blue well, and not have to keep mixing up blue like I did the red. I didn't have enough red set out. So let's go in with the blue and our gray, our darkest gray. I'm going to go ahead and just call that gray number 3. I'm going to put this out over here, making sure I don't touch that mixture I had on the side before with the orange in it. And so this is my first blue and gray mixed together, my darkest gray. So this is what this blue looks like when I mix it with that same gray that I mixed all of the above colors with. So this is blue with the darkest gray. We can see that there's how thin I've painted it, that there's something of a tint quality to it. I'm going to go back over it just with a little bit more saturated pigment in there. Get a little more pigment moving in there. I'm going to move that around because we're painting flat to try to get that to flow and be even throughout that rectangle. Just move it around physically so that way it just distributes over that surface. And because that's the only wet surface that we're dealing with here, it's not going to move too far outside of that zone. So there, I've got a nice, beautiful wash now because I picked it up and just physically moved it around, and it stayed contained in the area that was wet. So let's move this off to the side, and now I'm going to clean out my brush some more and roll that around. Okay, it looks like it's rolling off fairly clean. So I'm going to get that number 2 gray pigment, which is not quite as dark as the previous gray. And I'm just going to mix that in this mixture over on this edge here. And now this is my gray and blue number 2. And that looks like it's flowing about the way I want it to. I'm going to mix that last gray into that area over there where I've got the pure blue pigment, because this is getting too watery, and I can't swear that I can keep the little puddles from contaminating each other in terms of changing the values. Okay, and so this is going to be our second gray, that middle gray. And this goes on just slightly lighter than the tone before because we added white to get that gray. Just mixed up some black and white. So it's got obviously more white to it. So it gives us a lighter value than the darkest tone. And now we're going to put the lightest tone in, and like I said, I'm just going to take this and activate an area over here on this side, so that way I've got this little portion and it's all its own color, and I can get it nice and homogenized in terms of its color mixture. Okay, and I'm fairly happy that I've mixed up enough to cover this last rectangle, so I'm just going to go over to the rectangle on my paper and paint in this last tone. So this is my final tone of blue. So now we've got all of our primary tones painted in, and the only thing that's left is to paint in the tones for the secondary colors. So let's get those swatches going as soon as I cover that just a little better. Let's They seem really close in tone. Just gonna move this around again like I did with the first one to get some of that streakiness out of it. See if I can get the physics sort of working on my side for working in on a flat surface. Move that paint around, try to get it evenly distributed, and with it, that surface being wet, I'm just moving it around to try to get it to distribute itself evenly over that surface. And there I got a much more even distribution.